Hi, my name is Stewart Lynch, and in this video I'd like to show you how you can use NSUbiquitousKeyValueStore to share small amounts of data in your apps across different devices using iCloud. We'll be creating a property wrapper to simplify the process and look at using Notification Center so that your apps will be able to respond to changes made by another device. Now before I get started, let me request that if you enjoy the video, please leave a comment below and give it a thumbs up, and subscribe to my channel. Make sure that you ring the bell to be notified of new videos. And if you want to support my work, you can buy me a coffee. If this is something you want to learn, then keep watching. It's amazing what you can learn from others. You challenge yourself to use what you learn to extend that knowledge. For example, I read this article by Eric Walker on Medium in the Better Programming section, where he showed how closely NSUbiquitousKeyValueStore resembles UserDefaults. It's a persistence layer in that iOS is backed by iCloud and allows you to synchronize key value pairs to iCloud. This means that you have an app that is installed on multiple devices. You can create settings that will be able to synchronize across those devices. There are some limitations, but for small amounts of data, that's fine. Those limits mean that you won't be using this utility for sharing images and other large data items. They're meant to save such things as state and the last page read or the default account name or other such tiny bits of information that can propagate between devices to enhance the seamless movement of the user from one device to the next. Next, I thought, okay, well, wouldn't it be nice to be able to create a property wrapper for this and to make things easier to use? And I have a video on property wrappers, but I remember that before app storage came out for SwiftUI, there were several posts about creating a property wrapper for UserDefaults. So I did a search and I found this one here by Antoine Vanderlee. So I thought, well, that would be good to use and to try to modify for the NSUbiquitousKeyValueStore. I also wanted to take it one step further. I wanted to be able to store and retrieve codable objects. So I did a bit more research and found this one by Lee Ka Seng, and where he extends a UserDefaults property wrapper just for that. So I went for it. So in this video, I'm going to share with you how I went about creating my version. There is a starter project that you can download from the link in the description below. It's a simple app that has two tabs. On the first tab, there's a text view, a text field, and a control group with two buttons. The text field is bound to the new value state property. What we want to do is to save whatever is entered in that text field as the value in a NSUbiquitousKeyValueStore with a key called value. We'll do this when we tap on the Save button, and as we save, we clear the text field and dismiss the keyboard. I've created a view modifier that also adds a toolbar button to the keyboard that will also facilitate the dismissal of the keyboard. And this uses the new focus state feature of iOS 15. Then on the device, or on any device that we are logged in with the same iCloud account, I'll be able to tap on the load button and retrieve that value and assign it to the data string that is used for the text view. Now I'll go over the second tab once we get there, but first things first. You'll have to go to your target and change the bundle identifier to match your own domain. That's the first thing. Next, we'll need to add the iCloud capability. So with the target selected, click on Signings and Capabilities and tap the plus button and search for iCloud and add it. Once it's been added, we need to check the box that says Key Value Storage. And this will add the entitlements file to the project navigator. In my simple object view, in the action for the Save button, we can now save the value provided by new value to our persistent key. And we do this using the NSUbiquitousKeyValueStore and the set function, where we'll pass in new value for the key value, which is a string. Once we've passed it in, we have to tell it to synchronize, so we'll just do NSUbiquitousKeyValueStore and pass in the synchronize function. Once it's set, we clear the text field and dismiss the keyboard. In the load action, we can retrieve that string value from the key if it's not optional. Otherwise, we'll just assign an empty string. So our data string is going to be equal to the NSUbiquitousKeyValueStore string for the key value, otherwise an empty string. Well, let's test first on a simulator. We'll select one of the simulators in Xcode and run the app. And when the app launches, I'll make sure that I'm on the first tab and enter a new value and tap the Save button. Next, we'll tap the Load button and we'll see that content be entered into the text view that was formerly empty. We have successfully saved and retrieved the string. But this is really no different from user defaults. Well, I've not been very successful testing on two simulators. I am 100% successful when I test on two real devices, and partially when testing on a simulator and a device. And I'll explain in a minute. I couldn't get it working by other suggestions by trying to trigger an iCloud synchronization. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up an iPhone, and I'll use my iPhone, and I'm going to synchronize between my simulator and the iPhone. So once the iPhone has been running with our application and it's launched, I can tap on the Load button, and indeed that same key value gets entered into that text field. If I enter a new string on the simulator and tap on Save, and I can tap on the Load button to make sure that it's been stored, and it has. Back on the iPhone, if I wait just a little bit of time, I can tap on the Load button, and we'll see that that data gets loaded again. We have a two-way communication. On the iPhone, if I enter a new value and tap on Save, I'll find that it doesn't get recognized on the simulator. Even if I select that Features Trigger iCloud Sync, it doesn't. It doesn't work even if I delete the app and try again. The old value is still there. So it does work, as I said, if I'm testing against two real devices, and we'll see that a little bit later. But you'll just have to trust me right now. So in the meantime, let's stick with changing the values on the simulator and verifying on the iPhone. I can send a new value from the simulator, and when I open the iPhone, I can retrieve it. One thing you have to be aware of is that there is a significant delay before the data gets transferred. So if you tap too soon on the receiving device, the data may not be there, so be patient. Eventually, it will show up. You just need to know of that limitation. I mentioned that I wanted to take this further, so I thought that it would be great to be able to create a property wrapper so that it will handle the code in my buttons and make it reusable elsewhere. I have a video on property wrappers, as I mentioned, and I'll leave a link in the notes below. I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail, so please watch that video. First, I'll create a file that I'll call UbiquitousStore. And this is going to be the same name of my property wrapper. So I'll create a new struct called UbiquitousStore. And I'll decorate it with the @property wrapper designation. This requires a static property called wrapValue that can be a computed property that has a getter and a setter. What we get will require a key that will be a string, and if it's not yet initialized, we want to provide a default value. So let's create two private properties for that. Now, since they're private, we'll need an initializer. Well, now we have enough information to provide our getter and our setter. For our getter, we can return basically what we want from our load button in our view. Similarly, for the setter, we'll need to get these two lines of code, but we'll replace this value with our key, and then we can synchronize. And then to make our property wrapper useful and to be able to access those keys and default values, we'll create an extension for the NSUbiquitousKeyValueStore. And what we'll do is we'll use this property wrapper for the key value with a default value of an empty string and create a static var called value that is a string. This is similar to the app storage property wrapper in SwiftUI, except that we'll specify the default value in the initializer. With that in place now, we can return to our simple object view. And we're going to replace these two lines in the save action with simply NSUbiquitousKeyValueStore in its static value property, and to that we'll assign the new value. And then we'll reverse that for the load action where we'll assign that to data string. Let's test and verify. I'll run it both on the simulator and on the iPhone. Let me test by updating on the simulator and waiting for a bit and then loading it on the iPhone. It works. Now the problem is that this is just too specific. All we're able to save is a string. What if we want to store some other type? Well, we can go to our property wrapper and start to use generics. And I have a full video on generics that you can take a look at too, so I'll leave a link in the notes below. To make the property wrapper more generic, we'll need to specify a generic type instead of just a string. And we do that by annotating the struct like this. Now, the key is always going to be a string, but the default value will be our generic type, t. Then when we get our wrap value, we don't want to always get string for key, we want object for key. And we'll cast it as a t type. Let's do one more test. If I run on both, I can update that value on the simulator. And eventually, it will update when I load it on the phone. Perfect? Not really. What if we want to store a JSON object? Well, hang in there. That's next. The second tab has two text fields instead of one, and they're bound to a property in a settings object. The settings object has two properties, first name and last name, and full name is a computed property that concatenates the two together. So back in the Codable object view, when I tap on the Save button, I want to save the entire settings object. I'm going to store that object as encoded data using a JSON encoder and then decode it when I access it so that I can access the computed property and assign it to the full name variable for display. Well, we can update our property wrapper to specify that a generic type must also conform to Codable. And simple types like string already do, so our first example is still going to work. So in the ubiquitous storage then, we'll specify T must conform to the Codable protocol. In the getter then, we can do a guard check first to retrieve the data object or return the default value. Then we can try to decode the data to our generic value type and set it to value. If it's successful, then we'll return the value. Otherwise, we'll return the default value. We'll do the reverse for the setter then, and we'll try first to encode the data and assign it to data. Then we can set that data to the NSUbiquitousKeyValueStore's key and synchronize. That should do it. However, we're going to need to add a new static property to our extension to the NSUbiquitousKeyValueStore. So again, we'll use the property wrapper, ubiquitous storage. This time we'll say our key is the string settings. And the default value is going to be a new instance of settings with empty properties. And we'll set that as a static var called settings of type settings. Perfect. So back in our Codable object view then, when we save, we can simply assign the new instance of settings created when we enter values into the text fields of this static property. When we retrieve, however, we'll retrieve the settings and access the settings computed property full name to assign to our full name string. Let's test again on both the simulator and the iPhone. Let me first enter my first name and then my last name and save. I can test the retrieve settings button, and indeed my full name gets retrieved and entered into that text view. Back on the iPhone, once it's synchronized, I can tap the retrieve settings button here, and there we go, it works. I was going to stop this video here, but I thought that it would be really helpful if I didn't have to tap that load or retrieve settings button. Well, this may not be a perfect implementation, but for what it's worth, I'm going to show you how you can create a listener and have the text views updated when a change for that value is identified. In Tab View, I'm going to use Notification Center's publisher function to set up that notification. So at the top of Tab View Start, create a new constant property called pub, and we'll use the Notification Center's default publisher for object function. The notification name is simply the NSUbiquitousKeyValueStore dot, and we can use the did change externally notification. Now the object's optional, so we'll just pass nil. We will need to receive this on the main queue, however, so we'll need to add receive on run loop main. But we don't need any options. Well, next we'll need to notify our views when a change has been received. So I'm going to create another state property called receive notification. That's a Boolean that will initialize as false. Then we can add an onReceive that will receive this publisher. So we'll check to see if the publisher name is the same one that we are expecting. And if it is, we'll set the receive notification to true. Now we'll want to pass that on to our views as a binding. So after that, it's received notification and returns its values, we'll set it back to false again. So we'll need to do that on both views. Of course, I don't have those properties yet, so we'll need to go in and add them to our two views. So in simple text view, we'll add at binding var receive notification of type bool. This is of course going to require a constant in the preview, so it'll stop complaining. And then we can watch for changes on this value and update our UI. So on change of receive notification, where we'll get the new value, if new value is true, we'll set our data string to the NSUbiquitousKeyValueStore's value. And then we'll set our receive notification to false again so that we'll get notified if it changes again. And at the same time, why don't we add an onAppear to this view so that when it appears, it will automatically fetch and assign a value if there's one there. Similarly then, on the Codable object view, we'll need that binding. And we'll have to update our preview. And we'll need both the onChange and onAppear functions. For the onChange function though, our full name is going to be equal to the NSUbiquitousKeyValueStore's settings.fullname. And we'll use that for the onAppear as well. Let me build. Oh, I'm getting an error. Let's see why. Yeah, I forgot. This has to be a binding, so it needs to have $signs. So to test now, I'm going to run on 2 devices so that I can show you two-way synchronization. I've got my iPhone and my iPad. So let me display them both on the screen loaded with that application. Right away, I see that my 2 text views are populated. Let me enter a new value on the first tab and save. It takes a while, but eventually it's displayed on the second device. Perfect. Let me switch now to the second tab and enter a new name and save it. Make sure I'm on the second tab of the other device, and voila, eventually the name appears. We're done. Well, I hope you've been able to learn something new here and perhaps be able to incorporate it into your own projects. Thanks for watching.